All right, man, peace. So if you've been following the NBA season thus far, we're a little bit over halfway through the NBA season. There does seem to be an upswing in physical altercations amongst the players, as well as a growing antipathy between the players and the referees. This has caused many in the mainstream sports media to assert that the NBA may soon have, or may even currently have, an image problem. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
No question. So things got messy, guys, and it didn't stop there. So last night, things got superheated between the Magic and the T-Wolves, leading Aaron Aflalo to throw a haymaker during the scuffle. This, in combination with the fireworks from the Rockets and Clippers, leads us to ask this, Max.
Aaron Aflalo needs to sign up at a boxing gym as soon as possible. The right hand that he threw was reprehensible. Besides that, the man is so tall. If you're going to throw something, why throw to his head? Throw to the body. And that's something else, man. You should try to avoid any type of skirmish or altercation in real life, if at all possible. But if you do get into any type of altercation, go to the body. Don't go to the head. If you go to the head, he's going to fall straight back and hit his head against the concrete, the pavement, or the floor, and he may die. If you have to defend yourself, go to the body first.
Does the NBA have an image problem?
No, the NBA has the opposite of an image problem. The NBA has the image all the other leagues want. Think about this.
I agree with that to a degree. I have stated, it's on record, I've said that I believe that the NBA right now is the fastest growing American team sport, globally for sure. And nationally, it seems that they are making strides on catching the NFL. They're really not as close to the NFL as they would like to act like they are. But internationally, the NBA is definitely the fastest growing sport, and the second really only behind soccer in regards to team sports. And it's because it's the most accessible sport other than soccer. Much like soccer, all you need is a ball and a goal.
Not only is basketball as a team sport and the NBA as a global brand growing faster than any other team sport or brand in sports, that's, because intrinsically basketball is practically the perfect sport. But think of the image of NBA players. Like, who's the face of the league? LeBron James? Steph Curry? What are you talking about? Like fan-friendly players with great personalities, family men who do work in the community, who are socially conscious.
Well, look, let's understand this. And I do my best not to denigrate the exploits of many of the NBA's players in regards to how much they get involved in social issues. I'm already on record as stating that many of these cats have fallen down rabbit holes and are following behind narratives. Many of them are doing what their corporate sponsors are bidding them to do, particularly the Nike assets, that being LeBron James, Kevin Durant, etc. Steph Curry, I believe, jumped in because he wanted to feel like he was a part of what was going on with many of these other athletes, and he realized that getting involved in social issues is a great way to keep your name relevant and to keep yourself exposed. It is without a doubt that Steph Curry and his wife have plans in regards to how affluent they want to become. We're living in a day and age where it is no longer controversial for so-called black athletes to be involved in social issues. As a matter of fact, it is quite lucrative. It plays to their demographic, to their market, that they're out and about and talking about so-called black issues to whatever degree they feel like they're able to talk about these issues. So we're not living in the Muhammad Ali era where if you're a Muhammad Ali and you join the Nation of Islam or you say certain things in a certain way, that you will be stripped of your ability to participate in your sport. Now we're in an era where a LeBron James could wear one black sneaker and one white sneaker like an idiot, with both of them saying equality, and he feels like he's making a stand. Why is that? Because his corporate sponsors, Nike, have told him to do so. And Steph Curry, I believe that he's a little bit more sincere than LeBron, but not much more. He also is looking to, in tandem with his wife, make himself much more marketable.
Show, in LeBron's case, especially the courage of his social convictions to speak out when he thinks it's necessary. And I mean, he's a great brand ambassador, etc.
That's the best point you've made. He certainly is a great brand ambassador.
How many NBA players wind up with CTE, right? Like, is domestic abuse an issue that is linked to the NBA?
Well, no, not really. But one of the main reasons why domestic abuse is not primarily linked to the NBA. It's because the liberal sports media has a vendetta against the NFL, and I've touched on this already. They're trying to act like it's mostly NFL players that are getting involved in these domestic disputes, when in reality the NFL pretty much has been unassailable over the last 15 years, and therefore they don't feel the need to cater to the liberal sports media, which is why they entered in Colin Kaepernick to try to break down the NFL ideologically. And for the most part, he was semi-successful. The NBA is a branch of the liberal movement. So they're not going to report on a lot of the hijinks of those players like they would the NFL. As I've stated, everybody has a file. If they wanted to, they could open up LeBron James's file, Kevin Durant's file, James Harden's file, Steph Curry's file. I'm sure Steph has a file too. Whatever that is, it might be a minuscule file, but he has a file. So a lot of times it's not about what you do, but what's exposed, what's revealed.
No. Do these guys need hip replacement surgery before they're 50 usually? No.
Well, Charles Barkley just got hip replacement a couple years ago. He's around 50. Many of these NBA players are gimping around. You look at how Bill Russell walks. That man walks around like he's walking on hot coals. Many of these NBA players have a lot of degenerative leg injuries and hip issues, from around the time of their late 40s onward.
Brain damage? Right? Are they getting into fights constantly? Is that part of the culture of the sport? No, it's noteworthy when they get into a fight. Unlike the NHL, where that's a big problem in the sport, and I believe one of the reasons it's a marginalized sport.
Yeah, I wouldn't even compare the NHL to the NBA. Another reason quiet is kept, and many people might not like this, one of the reasons why the NHL is so marginalized is because it's viewed as a predominantly Caucasian sport. And let's be for real, there's a certain energy that is around the black athlete. And if people don't like that statement and feel like it's too racialized, well then you have to ask many of the promoters of these various team sports why the NBA and the NFL garner higher ratings than the NHL. NHL athletes are as competitive as these other team sport athletes. Many of them are just as proficient at their sport as NBA and NFL athletes are. Why is their sport stuck in a corner like that? It's without a doubt that many of these networks are looking for a great black athlete that they can wrap their arms around in the NHL as a proverbial Tiger Woods and try to bring the NHL out of that corner. But they can't find one.
In the United States of America. No, the NHL would love the NBA's image. The NFL would love the NBA's image.
Now, the NHL does have that brother who plays with tennis with Nashville. I'm trying to remember his name. He's a brother who gets in a lot of fights, always wears the wide brim hats when he's off the ice. But that's not going to get the job done. The NHL has done a very, very poor job in trying to bring in black athletes into their sport, and it's hurt them in regards to their ratings. They seem to be content with it, though, so it is what it is.
Is it considered a stodgy old sport that had its day, but it's past the way baseball is, which almost is never discussed on a national level? I mean, locally, if you listen to sports talk radio in your local market, baseball's all over the place. But as a national sport, no, it's suffering. Is it attached to youth culture? No, it's dissociated from the youth culture. Baseball largely.
I think baseball is making a bit of a comeback, though.
MLB would love the NBA's image. No, the NBA has the opposite of an image problem. The NBA has the image that literally every other major or quasi-major sport in the United States of America would love to have.
Max, bear with me for a second because I want to say something that's very important. I don't disagree with any of your points, but it's just not where I'm going here. I do not believe for 1 second the NBA has an image problem. I do believe it can become a problem if what has transpired over the last 36 hours to 2 days is something that is not an aberration or an anomaly, but becomes a regular thing.
Well, here's the problem with your statement, Stephen A. Smith, and this is really what I wanted to get to in regards to much of the sentiment that's promoted by the modern day sports media, particularly older members of the sports media like Stephen A. Smith. If you're going to state that fighting in the NBA can become an image problem, then it would behoove you to not contribute to the encouragement of fighting by no longer glamorizing the quote-unquote physicality and the fights from the 80s. Stephen A. Smith is fond of saying that there's no more physicality, there's no more fighting in the NBA now like there was back in the 80s. Well, you cannot have it both ways. You cannot try to castigate the modern day players for engaging in fisticuffs when you're the one who tries to promote and glamorize the previous era. So it's incumbent upon you and the other members of the modern day sports media to stop glamorizing that time period.
Simply cannot happen. It's something that the NBA guarded itself religiously against in David Stern, the former commissioner, building up the league. It's something that Adam Silver has taken by the horn, and he's done the same as well. After the brawl at the Palace in Auburn Hills, we saw the NBA come down with a heavy hand, which is why you see guys getting ejected, behavioral issues being addressed immediately so nothing is allowed to stir up and proliferate. We recognize that point. One of the other things that I think it's important to point out is that this is not an issue in the sport of hockey where you're allowed to fight, even though it's not to the degree that you used to be allowed to. In the sport of baseball, you're allowed to basically police yourself. Year suspensions take place, and then all of a sudden you appeal a suspension, it goes to an arbitrator or whatever the case may be. We get all of that. But the point is, by and large, that Major League Baseball players can get in the fisticuffs, and you don't hear about people being excoriated by Joe Public. You don't have that issue in hockey. You don't have that issue in baseball. So now it's incumbent upon us to ask ourselves the question, why does it exist when it comes to the sport of football? Why does it exist when it comes to the sport of the National Basketball Association? Let's just call it what it is. It's black players. And black players are judged differently. The black athlete is judged differently. Unfairly, I might add, and significantly more harshly by the public at large. Here is where I come in, completely sympathizing with the black athlete. I still feel compelled to say this. It's not always about right and wrong. It's about the optics. It's about perception. And as wrong as the public may be, you still have an obligation in an effort to protect the brand and your individual brand, not to mention the league itself. You still have an obligation to be mindful of it and conduct yourself accordingly.
Absolutely, I agree. And therefore, you also have an obligation as a major member of the modern day sports media, the mass media at that, to stop trying to glamorize an era of physicality that you often over-exaggerate. Stop talking about how players used to fight back in the previous eras and they barely got kicked out of the game, and acting like, you know, you still pine for those halcyonic days where you could hit somebody over the head with a back fist and you could roll around on the parquet floor for 5 minutes and you get broken up by the referees and they just blow their whistle and say play on. Stop glamorizing that era then. If you believe that a few little dust-ups over the last couple of weeks could lead to an NBA image problem. If that's truly how you feel, then you're part of the problem. Right? You're either part of the solution or part of the problem. That's what they say, right? So Stephen A. Smith, it's incumbent upon you and your cohorts, your fellow henchmen in the sports media, to stop trying to romanticize the 70s and 80s when guys were brawling. Because that gets into the head of these modern day players and it makes them feel like they're not tough if they don't engage in some type of fighting.
Because there are other people's money that's patronizing your product. So if you know the public at large is going to judge you on...
Bradley Beal was scared for his life there. He was like, just don't, please, I'm holding on for dear life here. If I let Draymond go, he's going to mollywop me.
Unfairly. It's going to judge you harshly. As wrong as they may be, you cannot be oblivious to that. You have to embrace it for what it is, because nobody's forcing you to play in these leagues. You volunteered, and if they're going to judge you harshly, you have to be cognizant of that. It's not fair, but it is reality, and it's a reality that the black athlete has been dealing with for decades, if not longer, and that is not going anywhere anytime soon.
Look, as much racial progress has been made, and
allegedly.
You know, as Martin Luther King said,
these people love quoting Martin Luther King. That's why, once again, that is how you know that Martin Luther King is a very integral piece in this society for mental manipulation and control. He's a control mechanism that liberal Caucasians use over the black community. That's why they always quote him, and they encourage black people to quote him, because that's a way to get his philosophies engrafted and ingrained in your subconscious. All right, whatever you do, just don't feel like you should be trying to build up to any resentment towards me and rejection of me and my ideologies. That's what the Caucasian liberal is thinking when they try to push Martin Luther King on the so-called black masses at large.
The moral arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice, and that has been the case in this country too. Though
the moral arc only bends towards justice when those who seek justice are not scared to reject those who are oppressing them. The only way to receive justice is when you're not scared of rejecting those who are oppressing you, not by seeking their acceptance.
Though we see that especially in the last year or so, year and a half, we see that the country is still deeply racially divided, and I understand that. And once upon a time, that was very obviously true about the NBA. It was perceived as a black league, and so David Stern said, hey, there needs to be a dress code. Don't give people who have biases, who have preconceived notions, and make judgments based on the people's appearance and racial, appearance. Don't give them any fodder,
Well, let me say this first off. Kellerman is making some pretty valid points, but the NBA was seen as a black league, not during the time when, not necessarily starting at the time that David Stern instituted the dress code. It was seen as a so-called black league from the mid-'70s. That is the reason why they made Jerry West the emblem of the NBA. That was strategic. Because really the emblem of the NBA should be Bill Russell. They made it Jerry West because they were trying to fight against the stigma that the NBA was a quote-unquote black league. Now, throughout the 80s, when Magic Johnson and Larry Bird started to bring the league into national prominence, and then during the time period of the Dream Team, when the NBA really started to go global, fortunately for the NBA, it was carried by many players who came in during the mid-'80s who were trained at major institutions like North Carolina and Georgetown to attend games dressed in a suit. Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone, John Stockton, all these players were trained to dress in suits. What happened in the late 90s is you had the influx of the hip-hop generation of NBA players. Really started with Chris Webber, because the Fab Five are the team that truly introduced real hardcore hip-hop culture into basketball. There were inklings of it before them, because UNLV with Larry Johnson and Greg Anthony, Anderson Hunt, Stacey Augmon, Charles Shackelford, they really were the first team to really bring that hip-hop element into the NCAAs. But then, of course, you had the Fab Five with the shorts, so on, etc. But in the mid-'90s, you had the influx of the Allen Iversons, Kevin Garnett's, of course, Shaq in the early 90s. By the late 90s, guys were coming to games with baggy jeans on and do-rags, so on and so forth. And then after Jordan retired, that element of the black athlete wearing a suit to the game started to disappear and dissipate. So David Stern made the right decision, to make a long story short. He did the right thing. And even though we look at many of these players coming to the games today and they look like weirdos, whether it be Westbrook or whoever, these guys wearing ripped skinny jeans and all that other shit, that's much easier on the eyes for the global media and for the global masses who watch the NBA, than the so-called thug image that was being pushed and promoted by, to be quite honest with you, agents of chaos like Allen Iverson. Right. Allen Iverson was an agent of chaos, extremely talented player, but he was an agent of chaos. His life was filled with chaos. So what was it that he was going to promote for anyone else other than chaos?
Don't give them any ammunition. So you show up in a suit and tie, and there's a certain kind of conduct that we expect. It's similar in terms of what motivates that decision on David Stern's part and that way of operating, to why Branch Rickey selected Jackie Robinson, because there were greater players than Jackie Robinson playing in the Negro Leagues. Robinson broke the color line in 1947. Major League Baseball was segregated before then, and largely afterwards for a while too, with the exception of Jackie Robinson and a few other black players.
Right. Well, Jackie Robinson was also in the know, and I did a video about this. The mainstream sports media likes to talk about how Jackie Robinson was the first black Major League Baseball player. No, he was not. There were black players in Major League Baseball in the late 1800s. It's just that, after the late 1800s, so-called blacks were banned from playing in the major leagues until you had Jackie Robinson come in. And Jackie Robinson was properly trained. He was in the know. He was a Luciferian. He was a high-level, quote-unquote, Mason, which is just code for Luciferianism. And people might get frustrated when I align Masonry with Luciferianism. The rituals of Masonry are just a diluted version of what was developed by Kush. And I go over this over and over again. You can read a book called Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, who was the chief Mason of the mid-1800s. He was also a Confederate general. He states point blank that when a Mason excels or achieves to a high enough level, a high enough degree, he is told point blank that his god is Lucifer. That is as per Albert Pike.
But the idea was Robinson would... Yep, yeah, sure. But Robinson would be able to take the abuse and grin and bear it. And
yeah, that was his job. He was, as a Mason, he's a master builder. His job is to assist in the building of the quote-unquote pyramid, globalism, bringing everyone together. That was his job. He realized that he was used as a pawn after the fact, and the brother died in his mid to late 50s, looking like he was in his mid to late 80s because of all the demons that he was forced to accept, all the stress that he was forced to deal with, being a good soldier for that globalist cause. He was also used as a pawn of the Rockefellers. I believe they gave him, they allowed him to open up a bank in Harlem.
And control himself, because obviously it's infuriating to take that kind of abuse. And so in some ways, it's related to that impulse, the idea that there needs to be a certain standard of behavior because that rises above other leagues, because people will come with negative expectations. And in fact, we still see it's true as recently as the Pac-Man Jones incident, which was because it happened over NBA All-Star Weekend. Everyone was talking about does the NBA have an image problem, when in fact it was an NFL player who perpetrated the crime, or someone, in his entourage who perpetrated the crime. And that's partly because when you look at the sidelines in football, who's the camera on? The head coach and the quarterback, usually a white guy. And so that's not the case all the time, particularly among the stars in the NBA. It's an African-American player. So I hear you. I understand what you're saying. But I think in spite of the racial prejudice that is obviously inherent here in the situation, intrinsic to the situation, I do believe, Stephen A., that the NBA has the image that all the other major sports leagues would like.
Well,
I agree with that. And before Stephen A. provides his retort, and Stephen A. likes to get on his soapbox and act as if he's so concerned about the image of the so-called black male athlete. The image of the black male is never going to be anything beyond a minstrel. When I say a minstrel, I mean a servant and an entertainer in this kingdom, because this is not our rest. So no matter how much brothers strive for some communal change or alteration in how the so-called black man is perceived, it's never going to rise beyond that. That is why people are incredulous when they read or hear a so-called black man state that blacks had any form of rulership. And that includes the so-called liberal Caucasians or quote-unquote liberal people of other races. Because subconsciously they're trained to view the so-called black man as an entertainer, meaning an athlete or a musician. So the issues run so deep that the only solution truly for the black man is to totally divest yourself of any investment in trying to change the opinions or the feelings of people who are non-essential, meaning the other races. Stop worrying about what they think about you. Stephen A. Smith is extremely concerned with the perceptions of the other races on the so-called black male. And those things are not going to change. I don't care how starched your dress shirt collar is, how tight your tie knot is, how well-fitting your blazer is. It is not going to change. Right now, they're more concerned with putting the woman over you than being concerned with any form of empowerment for the so-called black male. So you have to be concerned with your own empowerment.
Well, they may, Max, but that's because they have global appeal. I'm basically talking about the United States of America. From a global perspective, you're absolutely right. I don't think there's anybody that can compete with the NBA. But in terms of the United States of America, it's a different ball game, and there's different rules. And at some point in time, we have to ask ourselves, and I don't think enough, I dare say this, I don't think enough African Americans are bringing this up in the platform of national television. Do you want Do you want black appeal or do you want mass appeal? The bottom line is you want mass appeal because that means you get a piece of everybody's money. Everybody is patronizing your product. Everybody is patronizing your brand. And that's why you're able to sign multi-billion-dollar contracts. If it was just money that was emanating from the black community, you don't sign 9-year deals in excess of $24 billion if you are the National Basketball Association. If it was just black appeal, you don't look at the NFL and think that it's going to generate $18 billion annually, and you don't have a commissioner going out in public and saying, I'm confident that by the year 2027, we'll be able to generate $25 billion annually. That happens when you have...
Now, I let Stephen A. spiel go on because I want you guys to just please watch how Max Kellerman and Molly Qerim respond to his assertion that the NBA has to choose quote-unquote mass appeal over black appeal, which shows you that Stephen A. truly has no understanding over how to market a business, because the first thing that you have to understand when you're trying to market your wares or your business, you have to understand your market. So you have to understand what galvanizes people, what moves them, what they're drawn to. Watch how Max Kellerman and Molly Qerim respond to his assertion, his low-level assertion, and what they reveal.
Appeal is mass appeal sometimes.
Yeah.
Stephen A., those two ideas aren't mutually exclusive.
That. Culture vultures. Yeah.
Youth culture and African-American subculture is exportable around the world.
In other words, what Max Kellerman and Molly Qerim both agreed to very, very quickly is that black appeal is mass appeal. In other words, whatever the so-called young black male and female are coming up with, whatever they're concocting in that proverbial racial laboratory, is something that the other races always are yearning for. Right? It's like the best crack rock. And this has been going on now in regards to conventional history since the 1910s, when the so-called black man came up with jazz. But if you truly understand history, it's been going on well into antiquity. But, for the sake of conventional history, we can go back to the 1910s when we talk about jazz, to bebop, to rock and roll, to Motown, R&B, hip hop, so on and so forth, to the dress styles. Let me rewind it back a little bit.
And
we'll be able to generate...
Now watch what Max Kellerman interjects with.
Generate $25 billion annually. That happens when
black
you
appeal
have
is mass appeal
You heard what Max Kellerman said. He said black appeal is mass appeal.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Stephen A., those
Max,
two ideas aren't mutually
say
exclusive.
that. Culture vultures. Yeah.
Yeah, you would know because you are one of those culture vultures, Molly Qerim. From the music that you listen to the penis that you like to ride. You are one of those vultures. And hey, it is what it is. They say that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Yeah.
Youth culture and African-American subculture is exportable around the world and is also plays in the suburbs and plays in this country. Well, there are elements in a multicultural nation as ours is that various persecuted minorities have contributed to popular culture.
Look at how confounded Stephen A. Smith is at what both Max Kellerman and Molly Qerim have come at him with. Because he thought that he was saying something deep, but he truly only revealed that he has no understanding of the social dynamics, of global social dynamics. That being that the reason why the NBA is always going to market to the world through the black athlete is understanding that what black people like is what's considered fashionable and cool. And it's always been that way. So there's never going to become a point where the NBA is not going to be relevant because it quote unquote becomes too black or because they quote unquote are allowing too much fighting. The NBA is not going to allow too much fighting. They're going to nip this in the bud. They're going to have a talk with their players, and that's going to be that. Stephen A. is another one of these guys who tries to act as if he's sounding the cry and I'm just trying to protect my people. And in reality, he's just a scared dude. Stephen A. Smith is very, very scared.
Probably foremost among them African American.
But I'm not disagreeing with that. I understand from an intellectual perspective that you're absolutely correct. I'm not disputing that. What I'm saying is, theoretically speaking, ultimately, you want everybody's dollars. Now, what appeals to the black community probably appeals to a hell of a lot more people outside of the black community.
Not probably, it's a fact. It's a fact. And the fact that two non-blacks had to bring that to your attention, and you're giving a halfway acquiescence, shows that you're embarrassing yourself on this topic, sir.
Because we just got that swag, that love, that rhythm, that flavor. We get all of that.
Yeah, that's true. Look at Max Kellerman's eyebrows went up. Max Kellerman's eyebrows went up. Oh, I wish I was a black man, but at least I'm Jewish. I control the banks.
But what I'm saying is, from a literal perspective, you don't want money from just one monolithic community. You want everybody's dollars, which means that somewhere along the line, you have to appeal to everybody in some fashion in order to generate that kind of revenue.
For sure.
That's all I'm saying.
In my humble opinion, in light of everything that happened this year, the sport that took the major image hit this year has to be the NFL.
Nope.
Well, you would say that because you're a female, you're an agent of chaos, and you bought into the whole Colin Kaepernick narrative. You're a two-dimensional thinker, so you don't really understand what was going on with that. But I made video upon video in regards to the Kaepernick situation and that psyop, and the dude that they use, I believe his name is Nate Boyer, the Special Forces agent that was used to ramp up Colin Kaepernick to promote that nonsense and all that chaos and discord in the NFL. So of course she's going to fall for it because the NFL is not conforming to liberal media. The NBA is. The NBA is a branch and a pawn of the liberal media. But I thought that this video was very important to make because of the acknowledgement that was made by the two non-black people on the panel. They very, very blatantly stated that black appeal is mass appeal. So, so-called black man, it just goes to show you that you have a great deal of power if you stop worrying about who likes you and who accepts you, more than how you can monetize your own gifts. But anyway, peace.